will come to order. I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. I'd like to welcome everybody that's on the internet that will be listening. Also, if you have any cell phones, please shut them off so that there's no disruptions. If there are, there can be consequences like jerky for everyone, and there's a lot of people in this room, so I don't think we want to go down that road. So with that, I will have the secretary call the roll.
Representatives Anderson.
Here.
Denner.
Here.
Dietrich. Excused. Goodwin.
Here.
Gosh.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Halgard.
Here.
Jensen. McCleary.
Here.
Peterson.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Beal.
Here.
Wong.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Euston.
Okay, we have a quorum. There are no minutes that we need to approve since this is our first meeting of this session. I'd like to remind all testifiers that they need to sign in, make sure lobbyists are wearing the appropriate badges, and remind testifiers that you have any handouts, run them through the pages, and all testimony questions will be run through the chair. And with that, I'd like to have the pages that are here come up and introduce themselves. We have one page this morning, or two? Okay.
Hello, my name is Wright. I'm from Winter, South Dakota, currently a senior, and I plan to go to South Dakota State University to major in agricultural business and business economics.
Awesome. Glad to have you. You said the other page went to get something? Perfect. Okay.
Good morning, I'm Frank Fitzgibbons. I'm an intern here working for Representative Dietrich. I go to the University of South Dakota studying political science. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we have one bill this morning, House Bill 1057. I've talked to both the opponents and proponents, and we are allowing 40 minutes for each side, and we will be timing, and we want to keep it as close to that as possible. Then after that, there will be committee questions, committee discussions, and then we will vote on the bill. So with that, we will open proponent testimony on House Bill 1057. Is there any proponent testimony?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am Fred Deutsch, representative from District 4, and my computer just fried out, so if you'll give me a second here for it to boot up. Before you, you have a folder that I put on your desk, and we'll be referring to the folder throughout my testimony. And as soon as my computer boots up, should only take a second, we can get going here. Please indulge me a second. So today's bill before you is House Bill 1057. We call it the Vulnerable Child Protection Act, to prevent harmful medical acts against children who feel themselves to be the opposite sex. Before we begin, I have 3 amendments I'd ask you to please entertain. They're on the left side of your chart. They're also in the system. 1057A, 1057B, and 1057C. 1057A on lines 15 and 16 change the age from under 18 to under age 16. 1057B on line 17 changes the penalty from a class 4 felony to a class 1 misdemeanor. And on lines 6 and 7 on 1057C, it omits the practitioners from the bill that are not licensed to prescribe drugs or surgeries. So it omits nurses, medical assistants, and anesthetists. I would ask you to please consider moving those amendments, and I can speak to the entire bill if you would like.
I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair.
President Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move 1057A.
Any discussion on that?
Well, this gets the bill in the form that the prime sponsor would like it to be in, and I think this amendment is the amendment that changes the age from under the age of 18 to under the age of 16. So it clarifies in everybody's mind we're talking about only the youngest of South Dakota residents being covered under this bill.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. 1057A is passed. President Gosh.
I'd like to move at this time 1057B.
It's been moved and seconded. Amendment 1057B. Is there any discussion on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the amendment that was discussed that will take it from a Class 4 felony down to a Class 1 misdemeanor. And I would echo the comments of the previous speaker.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. 1057B is passed. President Howgard. Any discussion on that?
Similar comments, it's appropriate to address those that are directly involved in the potential to either prescribe medications or actually perform surgeries.
Any further discussion on that? Okay, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Okay, 3 amendments, 1057, A, B, and C are all passed and added to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members. So today, as a way of introducing the bill, you're going to hear compelling testimony from victims, compelling testimony from doctors, from progressive feminists, including an attorney who formerly worked at the ACLU, from a mental health counselor, from a transgender adult, a former transgender teen, and others. This diverse group supports the bill because they believe that the procedures listed in this bill are not health care, but are criminal acts against vulnerable children who are too young to understand the impact that sterility, mutilation, and other health risks that are lifelong will have on them later in life. Before I walk you through the bill, I want to say from the outset that there's no contraindication between my respect for adults who chemically or surgically alter their bodies to live as transgender, and my conviction that subjecting children to these interventions are deeply harmful and should be considered criminal. So with that, I want to direct your attention to the bill, and I'll just briefly walk you through it. Obviously, it's a short bill, page and a half. Section 1, I ask you to note the definition of sex, the biologic state of being male or female based on sex organs, chromosomes, and endogenous hormone profiles. This is the definition we took directly from the National Institutes of Health. We didn't make it up. Section 2 prohibits drugs and surgeries. Importantly, note they're only prohibited when, quote, attempting to change or affirm the minor's perception of the minor's sex, if that perception is inconsistent with the minor's sex. Section 3 exempts medically verifiable genetic disorders of sex development like intersex babies. Note that it does not require doctors or parents to do anything different than we do right now. It's a simple, straightforward exemption from the bill. Next, in your packet, I'd like to direct your attention to the paper with the pause button at the bottom. I think it might be the second or third on the right. To be clear, that's what we're talking about in this bill, pausing. We want to give children those under the age of 16, the youngest and most vulnerable children, the time to simply grow up. We don't want them taking drugs. We don't want them taking puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. We want to move them to the professionals that will help them, the mental health counselors and others, without intervening in their physical bodies. So why South Dakota? Why am I bringing this bill? And the answer is because we have doctors in South Dakota that advertise for these services. We have an affidavit from Dr. Hansen at Sanford documenting medical transgender treatment for children as young as 13. And I'm sure each of you received a booklet documenting stories of transgender children in South Dakota. There's 14 children in that booklet that the parents from Transforming South Dakota sent out. Some of those stories are children as young as 11 years old. That's why I'm bringing this bill, 11 years old. Children who suffer from not knowing if they're a boy or girl, like all children, deserve love and compassion. But the drugs and surgeries listed in this bill are in most cases a one-way street. On no other issue do we allow a child's self-assertion to be the basis for such life-altering decisions, or to allow children to undergo such permanent changes to their bodies. As you all know, in South Dakota, we don't allow children to smoke, play video lottery, buy a South Dakota lottery ticket, gamble in Deadwood, or buy, serve, or consume alcohol. Why is that? It's because children aren't prepared or qualified to make the decisions of this magnitude, even though they believe they may be. The second reason I'm bringing this bill and why I believe it's needed is because a child's belief that he or she is the opposite sex and the South Dakota doctor's decision to provide the procedures banned in this bill are based solely on a child's feelings. There's no blood test, there's no brain scan, nor any objective medical test to detect it. It's feelings. And as you all know, feelings change, especially in children. And of course, children are just beginning to learn how to understand these urgent new feelings of adolescence. Last, the bill is needed because it protects children by allowing natural puberty to occur. Over the last 40 years, at least 10 independent published studies have shown that if you don't stunt a child's growth with puberty blockers or give them opposite sex hormones or surgeries, on average, 85% of these kids will outgrow the disconnect with their biologic sex. That means for the vast majority of gender-confused children, natural puberty is part of the solution. So, what doesn't this bill do? It doesn't prohibit children from taking hormones or having surgeries once they turn 16. It's a pause button for under 16, 15 and under. 2, should social transition be recommended, such as referring to a child by their desired name, or encouraging them to dress, play, or wear their hair in ways that affirm their sex they believe themselves to be, there's nothing in this bill to prohibit it. Nothing. Last, there's nothing in this bill to prohibit counseling, talk therapy, or any other mental health services. To close, I'm going to ask you to please support this bill. We have a host of experts to follow me. I'll stand by for questions. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Is the next one going to be on by Skype or? Okay.
Yes.
Sydney Wright?
Yes.
Hey, can you all hear me okay? Okay, good deal. So my name is Sydney Wright. I'm a 20-year-old woman. I spent a year as a trans man. 2 years ago, I was a healthy, beautiful girl heading to high school graduation. But after taking testosterone for a year, I turned into an overweight, pre-diabetic nightmare of a transgender man. I'm here to speak today because I'm one of many young women that have been failed by the medical system. I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which is a mental health condition, and I was treated with mega doses of powerful testosterone. It ravaged my body. It caused me to gain 50 pounds, put me at risk for heart disease, diabetes, and teenage menopause. I'm not putting all the blame on the mental health professionals or the doctors. These are regretful choices I made as a teenager, but I trusted the doctor's advice. They were the experts. Who was I not to listen to them? Let's see. But telling an 18-year-old girl that mega doses of powerful testosterone would fix her mental health problems, they didn't even talk to me about other treatment options. No doctors or therapists suggested I give myself time to glow up or suggested counseling for what was causing these feelings. No doctor told me that most young people outgrow the feelings of wanting to be the opposite sex. The only advice I was given was to take the mega doses of powerful testosterone. I did this to myself for almost a year. Meanwhile, my mom is crying daily about why I'm doing this to myself, all the while blaming herself. One day, my grandfather sat me down, who was my favorite person in the world, with tears in his eyes, and he asked me to quit. That wasn't my saving grace, and I would have let the treatment kill me for admitting that I had screwed up. His intervention saved my life. Today I'm continuing to deal with the permanent side effects of messing my body up. I'm not a political person, I'm just a young person that needed help from doctors and unfortunately got caught up in a medical scandal. More and more young people are being deceived every day, being told that their solution to their insecurity and identity problems is to get a sex change. The problem is a person's sex can never really be changed. You can get the cosmetic surgeries, have the hormones, but that really doesn't change your sex or solve any of your issues. Instead, it adds more. I wish I knew this when I was younger. There are thousands of detransitioner stories like mine, international groups that started to support people like me that have been deceived and hurt by the doctors. So thank you for the opportunity to share my story as a former trans man that has learned a very hard lesson. I ask you to please support this bill, or you will save more young lives than you can possibly fathom.
Okay, thank you. Since they're on Skype, I think if anyone has any questions, I would entertain a question now. Or Hillary, will they still be on throughout the whole, so we can ask the questions afterwards? Okay, never mind. We'll move on to the next one. Lynn? Lynn, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good morning. My name is Lynn Meagher, and I am testifying today on behalf of the Kelsey Coalition, a national group of parents whose children identify as transgender. Transgender identities among children are no longer rare, but are spreading throughout our schools, as this parent of an 8th grade girl told us. In my daughter's current classroom of 35 students, there are 5 children who identify as transgender. That's 16% of the whole class. 3 are on hormones. These kids are only 13 years old. Nearly every day we receive testimonials like this. I took my daughter to a gender therapist and I was shocked to learn there was no test, no diagnosis, no criteria beyond a child's feelings to verify whether or not her self-diagnosis was accurate. Instead, the doctor put her on puberty blockers on the first visit. Or this, when we tried to get professional help for our teenage son, we talked to a psychiatrist. He wanted to give my son estrogen on the first day they met. This parent describes what happened when she took her 13-year-old daughter to a prestigious university clinic. After spending only a couple of hours with us, without considering any other mental health or physical issues, the therapist told us to start her on testosterone that day. And even more shockingly, another mother wrote, her pediatrician said she could refer her to get a hysterectomy. She was 16 at the time, and it was the first conversation she had about her feelings with this doctor. While the FDA warns against prescribing testosterone to grown men, mega doses are being prescribed to young girls, while surgeons are willing to remove their reproductive organs. What happens when other factors are overlooked in a rush to hormones and surgery? What if there is other trauma, other pain behind these youthful feelings and troubles? Can't we heal the hurts without cutting the body? And once we have cut that beautiful body, when the voice is permanently broken, the beard is there for good, the breasts are gone, What happens if the body was never wrong to start with? What will you tell the daughters that realize too late that they have destroyed their ability to bear children or to nurse them? When they find that their wounds had other causes, other origins, and required other treatments? I plead with you to hear the parents and the many stories of young people who have changed their minds after medical transition. This is not health care. This is a medical experiment on children. This is not life-saving care. These are criminal actions, and they must be stopped. Please vote yes on HB 1057. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Next we have Mike Laidlaw. Can you hear us, Mike?
Hi there, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm Dr. Michael Laidlaw, a board-certified specialist in endocrinology. I've written and spoken extensively on this topic. To begin, there's only two sexes. The male adult human produces sperm, and the female adult produces an egg. It's scientifically impossible to make a male into a female or vice versa. A high proportion of adolescents with gender confusion actually have other neuropsychiatric problems. A Finnish study showed 75% had been or were currently undergoing psychiatric treatment for reasons other than gender confusion. 26% had autistic spectrum disorder. Dr. Littman's study in 2018 showed that social contagion, peer pressure, and social media use were linked to clusters of minors with such confusion. There's 4 stages of what's being called affirmative care: social transition, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgery. Puberty is an essential part of human maturation. Puberty-blocking medications like Lupron cause a disease state, actually, and freeze normal development. Harms include sexual dysfunction and infertility, abnormal bone density with risk for fractures, and disruption of normal brain development. Tavistock Gender Clinic data in the UK showed that minors on blockers actually reported greater amounts of self-harm. Girls showed more behavioral and emotional problems and dissatisfaction with their bodies. Is puberty-blocking medication reversible? I get this question a lot. No. Time lost from developing together with peers and reaching important milestones can never be regained. That's your time for puberty. A key period of strengthening bone is lost forever. Sex-dependent brain development time is lost forever. Normal pituitary function, even if you stop the medication, can take a year or more to recover, and maybe not at all. We just don't know. It's not studied. Testosterone is being used on girls at dangerously high doses, 10 to 40 times above the normal adult female level. Known side effects include hypertension, dangerous high red blood cell counts, breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer risks. Males are also being given high-dose hormones, estrogen. Side effects include 5 times risk of deadly blood clots, embolisms, 2 times increased risk of stroke, high triglycerides, and increased risk of male breast cancer. Both sexes have been shown to have increase of myocardial infarction, heart attack, and death from cardiovascular disease. These hormones are a path to sterilization. In a study of kids on blockers, all 70 of those kids decided to go on to take opposite-sex hormones after blockers. Then the majority went on to have sterilizing surgeries where testicles and ovaries were removed. In the unethical study I have depicted, U.S. girls as young as 13 and 14 had completely healthy breasts removed. These girls can never get functioning breasts back. Surgeries for males include dissecting the penis and inverting it up into a pelvic wound. For girls, removal of the skin of the forearm and attachment to the pelvis to make it look like a penis. Possible surgical complications include serious infections, chronic pain, urethral strictures, and death. There are no rigorous long-term studies that show that these hormonal and surgical treatments I've described have any beneficial effect. They don't exist. Moreover, the majority of young children who suffer from gender confusion will ultimately embrace their bodies when supported through natural puberty, as Representative Deutsch said. Thousands of regretters of these harmful treatments can be found. You find them on YouTube, on social media. An example of one paradox is a detransition man I've spoken to personally. He says this: Gender affirmation, cross-sex hormones, and Eva surgery left my mind and body wrecked. Gender doctors abandoned me when I refused to continue transition. I suffer chronic pain, PTSD, and hormone dependence. Laura shared her touching testimony on YouTube. I took testosterone on and off for 4 years and had 2 botched mastectomy surgeries. No one was discussing detransition. I started using drugs. I think my story can help people. I'm very grateful I didn't make myself infertile. I'm a mother now. Understand that major medical systems can and have caused harm to people. Examples in the United States, the despicable Tuskegee syphilis experiment on African Americans. The entire German medical establishment was behind atrocious human eugenics experiments in Nazi Germany, including untold numbers of children. Acts performed by doctors which mutilate, sterilize, or otherwise harm minors, such as blocking normal puberty, high-dose wrong sex hormones, and sex organ removal, are not health care but are criminal acts. Please put the Vulnerable Child Protection Act on the books to protect South Dakota kids from such massive harms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Natasha Chart. We can't hear you yet. Yes?
People aren't hearing online with the Skype's on, just so you know, there's something going on.
Okay, thank you. We have to get our resident expert too. Thank you. We can't hear you yet. Can you hear me now? There's nothing there. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next one.
Can we try her back?
If we have time, we're almost half done, so just keep in mind. Okay, the next one then would be Bernie Hudson. Can you hear us?
I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
I'm Bernard Hudson, a physician who specializes in psychiatry and subspecializes in child psychiatry, board certified in both. After 40 years of medical practice, during which I have evaluated numerous children and young adults with gender dysphoria, a psychiatric condition with no objective medical signs, and illness confined entirely to the mind. My education, training, and experience have taught me that it is impossible to change one's sex. Administering puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, or surgical alterations of children's bodies denies this reality and withholds effective psychiatric treatment for children who are suffering from comorbid psychiatric illnesses. In my medical career, I know of several truths about minors presenting with gender dysphoria. First, most children will come to accept their biological sex as they grow into adulthood, provided they are not subjected to hormones and surgery. Second, treating a psychiatric condition with hormones and surgery in the absence of objective medical evidence preempts normal human biological development, thus making them a patient for life. Third, children with gender dysphoria have high rates of associated psychiatric illnesses, such as depression, autism, anxiety, and even anorexia nervosa. Guidelines that call for hormones and surgery deprive children of the right to receive effective psychiatric therapy to discover the underlying causes of their dysphoria, denying their right to effective evidence-based care. Fourth, there is no scientific evidence that these interventions reduce the risk of suicide. Long-term studies show that individuals who underwent these interventions have higher rates of suicide as they age. Puberty-blocking agents, cross-sex hormones, and mutilating surgeries are invalid medical treatments for suicide. Lastly, children are cognitively immature, and development of the brain continues well into the 20s. Yet children are giving assent to hormones and surgery that cause sterilization, as well as other medical harms based on a psychiatric condition with no objective medical evidence to confirm the diagnosis. In my professional opinion, these draconian medical interventions create lifelong harm to normal, biologically developing children. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We will move on then to David Pickup.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Can't see you, but we can, there we go. I think we're getting there. Yes, go ahead and proceed.
Good morning. My name is David Pickup. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been in practice for 11 years and have extensive experience treating teens and adults struggling with gender and sexuality issues. There's a rapidly growing body of literature suggesting that psychological issues play a crucial role in many young people's trans identification. Such issues include difficulties coming to terms with puberty, social isolation, affect dysregulation, anxiety, depression, self-harm, body dysmorphic disorder, and attachment trauma. A young person can all too easily adopt a trans identity as a way of explaining these difficulties while attempting to actually evade them. Every person with gender dysphoria, GD, is an individual, so it is difficult to generalize. It is generally agreed, however, that sex is biologically determined, while gender is psychosocially constructed. In GD, there is a mismatch between reality and perception. A person's subjective gendered sense of who they are is at odds with the objective biological sex of their body. There is no credible scientific evidence of a biological basis for GD. Therefore, in my professional opinion, it is inappropriate to resort to damaging physical treatment. Minors need protection. Their brains are still developing and they're prone to irrational decisions. It's beyond a minor's developmental capability to truly appreciate the pathway to sterilization that drugs and surgeries can cause. Therefore, I don't believe a minor can ever truly give informed consent to these potentially harmful procedures. In my professional opinion, the restrictions set forth in this bill are necessary. I believe it will help suffering children and will likely save lives. I ask you to please vote yes on the bill.
Okay, thank you very much. Move on to Glenn Ritter. I believe he's live. Thank you.
Yes, I am alive. I thank the board, Chairman.
Please turn your mic on. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I am alive. I thank the board, Chairman, and committee members for allowing me to testify. I'm Dr. Glenn Ritter, board certified family physician for the last 28 years in South Dakota, 4 years prior to that in Nebraska. Though it's medically impossible to change the sex, some children are prescribed dangerous hormones and surgeries to give the cosmetic effect or appearance of the opposite sex. These acts hurt children, as you've already heard. Most of these children are ordinary boys and girls, just like you and I were at one time, somewhat depressed, anxious, traumatized about what's going on in our bodies around the time of puberty, struggling with their identity. And again, a situation not very uncommon to today's youth, and even our youth when we were kids. Several studies show that teens can embrace that biologic sex at birth given time. If we do nothing at all, but certainly if they get some counseling, they're more likely to accept that biologic sex. Instead, they're being chemically castrated, sterilized, surgically mutilated by physicians according to only ideology, no science, which in any other situation would be considered criminal. Puberty is not a disease, but a critical window of development that once closed cannot be reopened. Time still passes. There is no stasis of the brain. And mind development goes on. Puberty blockers like Lupron are not FDA approved for use in healthy children. They can be used at times, and they have in the past, to chemically castrate sex offenders. Puberty blockers chemically castrate the children at the level of the brain, sending girls into premature menopause and boys turning into eunuchs. This sets them all up for
infertility issues and harms not only their physiologic development, but their transition into fully functional persons as adults. The only the only study on record shows that 100% of the kids placed on the puberty blockers moved on to the cross-sex hormones. And again, as attested before, a lot of those moved on into the surgery. This suggests that puberty blockers lock kids into this false identity. There is not any reversible things that are going on. That means that 100% of the kids are permanently sterilized. Cross-sex hormones are given at markedly higher doses than any normal physiologic doses given to any age, and increase again the risk of heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, blood clots, cancer, and an assortment of other physical and emotional ills. Science confirms what we must all accept. Children are not just small adults. Prepubescent children are not emotionally mature enough to understand the short or certainly long-term ill effects of this ideologic treatment that thus is it disables them to the ability of giving actually informed consent. They cannot know all or have the opportunity to answer the questions. They cannot consent to irreversible acts that permanently alter their bodies and prevent them from ever in the future having children. Sterilizing and mutilating kids, turning them into lifelong patients dependent on these drugs, should be considered criminal acts, especially when committed by physicians who, above all, should be trying to do no harm. Please vote yes for the Vulnerable Child Protection Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move on then to Kara Dansky.
Good morning. Can you hear and see me?
I can hear you. There we go. Now we can see you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Kara Dansky. I am an attorney and I serve on the board of the Women's Liberation Front, known as WOLF. I formerly worked for the ACLU's National Office as Senior Counsel on Criminal Justice Law and Policy. I'm also a lifelong Democrat. I am speaking today on behalf of WOLF in support of House Bill 1057 and to address the unsupported assertion that the bill is unconstitutional. The ACLU of South Dakota has proclaimed that it is unconstitutional to single out one group of people and categorically ban all care, no matter how medically necessary. But it is not at all obvious why this bill might be unconstitutional. As a general matter, Americans do not have a constitutional right to receive any particular medical procedure. For example, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Washington versus Luxburg that physician-assisted suicide is not a fundamental liberty interest that is protected by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. It is clear from Supreme Court jurisprudence that mentally competent people have a constitutionally protected liberty interest in refusing unwanted medical treatment. See, for example, Krogman versus Missouri. But in the same case, the Supreme Court noted that this right must be balanced against legitimate state interests. And the general constitutional right to refuse treatment does not necessarily suggest that there is a corresponding right to obtain treatment. If this bill is enacted into law, and if it is ever challenged on constitutional grounds, one question will be whether the law is protecting a legitimate state interest. In other words, does South Dakota have a legitimate interest in protecting the integrity of the bodies of minors? And the answer must be that of course it does. Generally speaking, U.S. courts have ruled that minors have the right to consent to medical treatment under certain circumstances, but that right is not absolute. It is subject to balancing against legitimate state interests. For example, in the case of In Re E.G., the Supreme Court of Illinois ruled that mature minors have the right to consent or refuse medical treatment, but that this right must be considered along with 4 state interests: preserving life, protecting the interests of third parties such as parents, preventing suicide in cases concerning the termination of life-saving care, and maintaining the ethical integrity of the medical profession. The court did not, notably, distinguish between 16 and 17-year-old minors and other younger minors in its ruling. Whatever else one might think about putting a child on dangerous hormones and permanently altering the integrity of a child's body, surely such a practice implicates the state's interests in preserving life and maintaining the integrity of the medical profession, at a minimum, as multiple doctors have testified today. The ACLU could also be suggesting that the bill is in some way in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, but that is not true either, because self-identification as transgender is not a suspect class under existing equal protection jurisprudence. I thank you. I would also just add that gender identity is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is not a civil rights movement. In conclusion, I urge the members of this committee to vote yes on House Bill 1057. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Scott Newgent.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Scott Nugent. I'm a 47-year-old transgender man. So far, my insurance and myself have been billed just under $1 million to medically transition. And like other transgender people, I will continue to be dependent upon drugs and doctors for the rest of my life. During this process, I have had many complications, some of them life-threatening. If you investigate medical transitioning, you will soon discover that complications are glossed over as if it's like changing clothes, and that is just certainly not the case. Undergoing this change was vital for me, and it's essential for other adults. But the changes I underwent should never be offered to minors. I'm here to talk to you today as a transgender man, and on behalf of over 100 transgender adults that have signed my petition to stop medical transitioning of children. Speaking here today is not easy for me. I am not abandoning my transgender community. I am saving your children, which needs to be the priority. My voice is not one of millions. My voice is the silent majority of the transgender adult population. For me, a parent of 3 kids at the age that they are pushing to medically transition kids has given me a lump in my chest, and I cannot afford to be in the safety of the closet any longer. I know what medical transitioning is like, and I'm here not to save my kids, because I know better. I'm here to save yours. Medical transitioning is dangerous, harmful, and in many ways irreversible. The opposition will likely tell you that the first step for this process is puberty blockers. Puberty blockers, they'll say, is reversible. But that's not the truth. That's not the truth at all. Lupron, the company that manufactures puberty blockers, was already prosecuted and fined over $875 million for false advertising and bribery to increase sales. In my opinion, I don't believe that we should be trusting this company with the innocence of our children. No doctor, no psychologist, no parent, or anyone else has the right to sign up a child for this, to become sterile, to be locked into the medical industry for life. Only an adult has the right to make this decision about themselves and their own life. A child has not developed enough reasoning or logic to process what happens when you medically transition. They cannot see around corners and understand the implications of what lies ahead. Truth be told, no one can, unless you have medically transitioned. You may hear the opposition say that not allowing kids to have puberty blockers and opposite birth hormones will increase suicide, but that is simply not true. When these children, the ones that we are medically transitioning right now, reach 25, and most of them will realize they are now locked into the medical system for life. They cannot have children. They have issues medically that they did not have before this process. This is when we will see a true suicide epidemic. We will look back in history and see people fighting for children and people throwing our children to the wolves for financial gain, because I'm telling you, that is what it is. My advice to a parent of a transgender child is to pick them up, hold them, cry with them, align with them, let them wear whatever clothes they want to wear. Let them be called whatever they want to be called. But for God's sakes, protect children from medical transitioning. No one has the right to do this to any other human being but an adult about their own lives. It's just common sense. Please protect vulnerable children, because currently no politicians have the guts except for Fred. And thank God for him. No medical transitioning kids ever. And that comes from somebody that's not a detransitioner. I am transgender. I have completely medically transitioned, and I do not have a dog in this fight. I'm trying to save your kids. After this meeting, I will be sending a video to Fred, and he'll send it out to you, and it'll give you a longer explanation on why I do not believe kids should medically transition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you much. We're coming up on, we've got about 5 minutes left. I don't know if Natasha is able to come on or not. Natasha, are you there? I don't think this is going to work. This is not going to work. President Deutsch, do you have any closing comments?
Mr. Chair, if you'll indulge me for a moment, I do have Natasha's testimony that I could read if you would allow me to.
Is this, am I on now? Is this working now?
Is this Natasha? Yes, we can hear you
Yes.
now.
Oh my gosh! I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was just tapping on that button like anyway. Hello, and thank you for considering my testimony. I'm the board chair of the radical feminist organization, the Women's Liberation Front, and a longtime political progressive. We've all been told that gender identity issues are extremely complicated and maybe beyond our ordinary understanding. But I believe that this is a misdirection. I'm a bisexual woman on the autism spectrum, and when I was young, I loved dinosaurs, archaeology, and science fiction. I hated my body as puberty started. I really hated the way grown men started leering at my chest. Doctors and schools also didn't usually catch mild autism in girls then either, and it was pretty hard. But today, I might be told that my odd interests or social unhappiness, my nonconformity to stereotypes, might mean that I've been born in the wrong body. I was depressed as a teen and had few friends. I might have diagnosed myself as transgender, as so many do now, after seeing hundreds of transition testimonials on social media. Today, girls like me are put on Lupron and sent into premature menopause as young as 13, maybe to get mastectomies soon after. Then they may need a hysterectomy by their early 20s from the harms of testosterone acting on female organs. But we can all be sure that humanity hasn't suddenly developed a new type of child that really needs their sexual function removed before adulthood. Though sadly, I've now seen years of press coverage of girls who sound much like I was, saying they want to be boys and damaging their bodies to prove it. Doctors shouldn't help kids take out their sadness and their anger on the only bodies that we can ever have. I would ask you to please vote yes on HB 1057 and forbid the sterilization of these young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we are up against the end of 40 minutes, so I will close proponent testimony and I will move to opponent testimony. And I have a list of people that I received from the opponents. I will go down that list. There could be other people that want to testify, that it will depend on how the time goes out. So we will start with Mr. Krogman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Dean Krogman, I represent South Dakota State Medical Association. We believe, as do many, almost all of the major medical associations agree that this is a science-based medical diagnosis. can't deny it. And is this a protection for kids by putting this into law? I would say it's the opposite side. In fact, there are statistics that have been put out to the tune of 52% of the people that are in this mode of transition are less likely to commit suicide. In fact, they can show that 48% of the transition people have not committed suicide. So the opposite is, isn't that protecting young people? The other part of this is you have to understand, and I know you do, there is not any one of these listed types of surgeries and so on that can be done without parental consent. So if you want to criminalize this, the only state in the nation that would criminalize the doctor-patient relationship, you are also criminalizing that parent who is in charge of that minor. They are complicit because they are the ones who are allowing this to happen, not a 12-year-old child, male or female. So we believe that in the health, with the health of the recognition of this medical diagnosis, that this ability to treat the transition of the transgender issues is a positive thing and protected by law under the requirement of adults who can make this decision and minors cannot make this decision. So we would encourage you not to put South Dakota on the map. We believe there's national implications of this. Equal protection under the law has not been tested in the transgender issue. But it's certainly, federal law today has warned against discrimination of transgender people. This is potentially national implications. And I think we have to recognize that. There are 20 states in this country today, 20 states that have laws on the books that says insurance companies cannot block treatment of transgender patients because they can't block it because of the transgender identified medical issue. So we think this is very risky. We think the parents are the ones who should be in control of the minors. And I have not heard of one single issue that has occurred in this. Again, just like last year's Simon Law, it's a statement. We have the only Simon's Law in the nation because of the way that bill was written. That's a statement. This statement, this issue of protecting kids has national implications, has legal implications. I have Dr. Flynn hopefully on the phone, and she said she will be very brief. She is a child psychiatrist and would like to speak to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you much, Mr. Krogman. Is Dr. Flynn, can you hear me? Dr. Flynn, are you there? I know you were on a second ago. Okay, we'll have to see if we can get her back again.
I apologize, I'm on the phone.
Okay, thank you very much. You may proceed, Dr. Flynn.
Thank you. So thank you being here, and thank you committee members for allowing me this time to speak this morning. My name is Dr. Sarah Flynn, and I'm a psychiatrist with specialized training in child mental and psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. I graduated from the University of South Dakota Stanford School of Medicine child and adolescent psychiatry is a specialized area of training that focuses on child development and brain maturation and therapy and treatment of children and adolescents and families of children that are struggling with mental health issues. So adolescence is a time of great change, both physically and emotionally. It's a time of development of self and personal identity, and gender identity formation and sexual orientation are part of that normal maturation process. We don't fully understand why some people have gender dysphoria, but there is scientific data that points to biological underpinnings. There are twin studies where if one twin has gender dysphoria, there's increased incidence that the second twin will also have gender dysphoria. So there's genetic implications. There's also evidence where children who are exposed to hormones in utero while they're developing are more likely, related to medical conditions that the mother may have, are more likely to develop gender dysphoria in childhood and in adolescence. When I say gender dysphoria, I'm referring to people that are transgender. So there are other studies as well where we look at MRIs of brain, people with gender dysphoria that have not had medical treatment at all, and their brains more closely align with the gender of others for which they identify. So there are biological underpinnings. We don't fully understand why some people have gender dysphoria, but there are likely genetic and environment reasons that are complex. Guidelines have been developed for the treatment of people with gender dysphoria. There are multidisciplinary teams that have gotten together. The most recent one was an endocrinology, endocrine society guideline in 2017, where field of experts of endocrinologists, psychiatrists, and psychologists, experts in their field, got together to create a medical guideline for helping people with gender dysphoria and making decisions about medical treatment or not. In my clinical practice, I've seen and had the opportunity to work with some people who are going through struggles with gender identity. Some of my patients have chosen to undergo a medical treatment, and that's been a very personal decision between a child or a later adolescent and parents and their medical doctors. In my experience, what I've seen with acceptance of a person's gender identity and medical treatment, that there's been improvement in their condition, that oftentimes they no longer need these and are no longer under the care of psychiatrists for depression or other conditions. So child and adolescent psychiatrists are uniquely trained to help assist evaluate kids to determine the level of their capacity to make medical decisions. Brain maturation doesn't just end when you're 18 necessarily. Some kids develop the capacity to make decisions related to long-term medication use when they're 16, 17. Some kids at 18 still don't really have that capacity to see into the future and make those types of decisions. But certainly parents are the ones making medical decisions for their older adolescents related to medication. Any decision to treat a child is certainly made carefully using medical guidelines and standard of care. This law really would interfere with careful medical practice. There's evidence to show that when there's appropriate medical care for people with gender dysphoria, that there's a reduction in depression and possibly suicide. This law makes it difficult for doctors to treat their patients, and it places a physician in a terrible position of denying appropriate care versus the choice of facing some serious legal consequences. So I would, as my role as South Dakota Council for Child Adolescent Advocacy Liaison, a member of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, I'd reference the policy statement that was produced on November 8, 2019. It was developed to oppose this type of legislation that would ban medical care for youth. And in that role, I am advocating in opposition to this bill and for my patients. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Flynn. Just stay on the line for just a minute to see if anybody has any questions. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Flynn. It will take us just a little bit to get Dr. Kappelman on the line. As long as this works, we'll just proceed this way. I shut your time off too, by the way. Just as an FYI for the people listening online, it's my understanding you were not able to hear anybody that on Skype. You couldn't hear that. I apologize for that. Not sure what was going on. We will check into that and get that fixed, but I apologize for that. Okay, we're not making a connection here. We will move on to Michaela Sieber. Good morning, Michaela.
Hi, good morning. My name is Michaela Sieber. I'm a tribal member of the Sisseton-Wachton Oyate. I grew up in Sisseton, and I've called Sioux Falls home for 8 years now. I have a master's in public health, and I've been a public health researcher for the last 6 years. I'm here on my own behalf, but I'm also an executive board member of the Transformation Project, the South Dakota nonprofit that exists to support trans youth and young adults in our state. Because of my background in research, I thoroughly investigated this bill and the reasons behind it. What I found made me very uneasy with the sponsor's claims and justifications for this bill. In interviews, and on the website devoted to HB 1057, the sponsor claims there is no scientific evidence to support the use of hormones, and on the website he created cites scientific articles to justify this. Had he read the articles he'd relying on in their entirety, he would have realized the researchers did in fact find clear scientific evidence to support the use of puberty blockers. One of which stated, girls can expect no adverse effects when treated with pubertal oppression. The authors actually recommend beginning puberty suppression when kids first exhibit changes of puberty, and urged physicians to have thorough conversations with their patients before beginning hormone therapy. Meaning these articles don't support his points or reasons at all. In fact, they present facts that are in conflict with the statements made in and about the bill. HB 1057 is full of misrepresentations and false narratives. The bill sponsor also claims to have drafted this bill after speaking with trans people online, not necessarily from South Dakota. I spent my summer talking in person with actual South Dakotans who identify as trans, 14 South Dakotans, in the publication that was mentioned earlier, Transforming South Dakota. Their ages range from 11 to 27, and even the youngest of this group is aware of this bill, and they are hurting from this. These kids want what every child wants: to be loved, valued, treated fairly, and to be free from government intervention into their private lives. Please give them a chance to thrive. The Transformation Project and myself wholeheartedly oppose this bill. Please vote no.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've made a connection with Dr. Kappelman. Not yet. Okay, Ms. Rave.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Mitchell Ray. I am a lobbyist for Sanford Health, and we are opposing House Bill 1057. With me is Dr. Michelle Schimmelfinnig, pediatric doctor from our health system, and also Dr. Ala Al-Nafal, a pediatric endocrinologist who will take this chair after me with your permission. For all our patients at Sanford Health, including our transgender patients, we follow well-established standards of care. This includes policies set forth by insurance companies and nationally recognized medical associations. With these standards for treatment in place, we believe this legislation would be an overreach and governmental intrusion into the exam room between patients, their families, and providers. At Sanford, we feel that healthcare decisions are private and personal matters, not the business of the government. House Bill 1057 would prevent an individual and their guardians from having any choice in what would be the best course of care for that individual. At Sanford Health, we also feel that House Bill 1057 is an unnecessary bill in this state. In 2019 at Sanford Health, we saw over 1 million patients across our system. Of that 1 million, less than 20 patients were treated with gender dysphoria under the age of 18, and not even all of those were South Dakota residents. This shows that this is not an industry, rather a handful of individuals that are coming to us for help and treatment. At Sanford, we are in the business of healthcare. Our teams of physicians are here to help our patients. I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Michelle Schimmelfinnig.
Mr. Chair, and members of the committee, my name is Dr. Michelle Schimmelfinnig, and I am a board-certified pediatrician with Sanford Health. I have a master's in public health, and I'm the current president of the South Dakota chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm speaking to you in opposition of House Bill 1057. This bill criminalizes medicine. It is in direct opposition with the policy statements of the American Academy of Pediatrics and other academic societies. These policy statements reflect comprehensive medical literature, and organizations represent thousands of physicians. As pediatricians, we dedicate our lives and sacrifice time in our youth to become competent and compassionate providers. We sit with families and help them wade through some of the most difficult and challenging years of a family's life. We deliver bad news and we celebrate accomplishments. We take an oath, do no harm. And one of the most sacred components of our job is the relationships that we have with our patients and their families. This bill conveys that legislation, not parents and physicians, are best equipped to make those individual and challenging decisions regarding the child's health. To protect children, we have means. It is our Department of Social Services and our state medical board. This bill directly distorts the patient-physician-parent relationship by allowing government into the exam room. Additionally, it is a vote of no confidence in the face of our medical board and the Department of Social Services. I ask you to consider the implications that this bill will have for the children of our state and for our physicians. It is far-reaching and sets a bold precedent of big government. In this room today, you have 22 pediatricians, 22 physicians. Collectively, we have more than 200 years of training and experience. And I ask you, please let us care for the children of this state, because we care. Please don't let us choose between evidence-based medicine and jail. I appreciate your time, and please vote no on this bill and allow the physicians of our state to practice and continue to care for the patients and children of our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nafal?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. My name is Dr. Alal Nopal. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. I specialize in the study of hormones in children. I work at Sanford Health for the last 5 years, and I graduated from Mayo Clinic, and my wife and I chose South Dakota as a home, and we have 2 South Dakotan children. So I'm here to clarify some of the information that have been brought to you and maybe correct some of them. We heard in the last 40 to 50 minutes some information about the reversibility of these puberty blockers that are used in children. The most commonly and the recommended puberty blocker by the Endocrine Society, Pediatric Endocrine Society, and multiple and other endocrine societies is Lupron or GnRH blocker or agonist. And these medications are actually reversible. Indeed, I use this medication in my practice in non-transgender patients for an FDA-approved indication central precursor puberty, which is puberty that happens before the age of 8 in girls and before the age of 9 in boys. We do this treatment for these kids until they are mature enough to go into puberty. Then we stop the medication and we let them go to puberty, and they do go through puberty. So if this medication is used in children for other indications, and it's actually FDA approved. One other information that you heard is puberty blockers stunt growth. It actually does. Puberty blockers do not stunt growth in children. So I know there are a lot of people are after me wanting to talk. I'm available to answer any questions about the guidelines that are published in 2017 by the Endocrine Society and the Pediatric Endocrine Society. So please, if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nafal. Now, I believe we have made connections with Dr. Kappeman. Are you on the phone?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you may proceed. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I am Dr. Kappeman. I'm Anna Kappeman, an OB-GYN board certified who practices in South Dakota. And I'd just like to highlight kind of the same concerns we've heard before briefly. First of all, medical care shall always be between a patient, their family, in this case of minors, and their doctor. As practicing physicians, we take an oath of confidentiality and always try to uphold HIPAA. We pride ourselves on that. I want my patients to feel safe and comfortable expressing their concerns to me, and this bill would inhibit that. Medical professionals and parents in the case of minors should be in the best position to determine what medical care is in the interest of their child or patient. I think South Dakota has always prided themselves on allowing their citizens to have autonomy and know what is right for them and their families. This bill criminalizes medical care, which is concerning. Charging professionals for providing evidence-based medical treatment is a slippery slope. This could deter future doctors from coming to South Dakota if they feel their practice is limited, maybe not on this issue, but on something that could arise in the future. I just worry that this bill infringes on the patient-doctor confidentiality relationship and could have detrimental effects to our state. Thanks for your time. Please keep in mind what this would mean for our physicians, our parents, our children. This is a very stressful and tough situation for them, and they just want to find the best care out there.
Thank you, Dr. Kappeman. Anyone have any questions for her at this time? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to Mr. Owen. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. David Owen, South Dakota Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I think we can achieve, they're the same, both piles are the same. We can achieve a mutually agreeable goal of keeping my time at this table to a minimum, if you will allow the pages to pass on a statement from the chairman. Two questions are on our mind. First, is this a good law for this state at this time? We are a conservative group of people that are slow to put government in these kinds of situations, and we have learned, if nothing else this morning, this is a complex situation. And we truly believe, while the proponents are well intended, that there are many other states that deal with this more extensively. To a certain extent, as shown by the proponents, that we're almost exclusively from those kinds of states. We would urge us to not be the first, to let them work out the best language and the best approach, only because this is also addressed by medical protocols. Second, and more important, we are always nervous when these bills come up that identify certain classes of people, that the headlines that go nationwide will cost us conventions, entertainment, and investment in the state. In the back of that piece of paper, you have an NBC online national headline that's already causing some phone calls. We need to be cautious with these things. These kinds of economic consequences are real, and we urge you not to pass this bill at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Mr. Van Camp.
Thank you,
you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bill Van Camp, I'm a lawyer here in Pierre and a registered lobbyist for the South Dakota Retailers Association. I'm really just going to parrot David Owen and the South Dakota Chamber. The issue of the retailers is that if there's the best intent of the sponsor aside, we need to see an identifiable South Dakota issue here on a matter that we feel will impact business in South Dakota and hurt our members, brought about by the kickback that we're already seeing in this legislation nationally. And this bill's been only out in the public for a week, but we're hearing about it. We expect to hear about it a good deal more, and we don't think that's good for business without an identifiable South Dakota problem. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Deborah Owen, and I work for the Sioux Falls Area Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber rises in opposition of the bill, also agreeing with retailers will not add more to it. Just the bottom line is for us is that the Chamber expresses their concern for the larger impact to our economy and to our state. Please vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Candy brings plenty. Good morning.
Hematakiapi. Ngayon to delay, you have to watch the natin choose yapi. Imachiapi, which is to be your young body. Imachiapi, Chante Makiloi. Good morning, Chairman and committee members. I would like to greet each and every one of you with a handshake from my heart. My name is Candy Brings Funny, and I am a staff member and a lobbyist for the ACLU. I am the voice and the representative in this room for the ACLU. And I'm here today to urge you to vote no on House Bill 1057. We oppose this bill because it causes great harm to transgender youth and young adults across the state. We have spoken to many transgender youth and families since this bill was filed. And what they have told us is that they feel frightened, they feel hurt, and they feel attacked by this legislation and by this bill. And since this bill was first filed, we have sat down and we have spoken to many families, to many transgender youth. And what they have told us is that they are frightened. These kids, like all kids in South Dakota, deserve a chance to experience joy and to be supported to get the health care they need and to thrive. When the government proposes laws that would stigmatize them, undermine them, and undermine their health care, they lose those opportunities. Please vote no on House Bill 1057. Wopila Tonka, Matakiase.
Well, there'll be questions afterwards, so we'll wait till we're done. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Naomi Lundeman. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman and committee members. Dr. Naomi Ludeman Smith is my name. I am lobbyist for LEAD, South Dakota, and we oppose this bill. Transgender youth live in our communities in South Dakota, and they are not going away. Transgender kids, like all kids, deserve a chance to experience joy, to learn in a safe environment, to get the health care that they need, and to thrive into adulthood. When the government proposes laws that would stigmatize them and undermine their care, they lose these opportunities. We believe that families should be allowed to make their own medical decisions. This bill inserts the government into the doctor-patient relationship and sets a dangerous precedent for government intrusion into these confidential matters. We trust families and believe we should be removing, not creating, the barriers and making children more vulnerable in order to thrive in South Dakota. Please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim Park. Good morning.
I'm Kim Park. I was born and raised in Rapid City. My husband and I chose to raise our family in Sioux Falls because of South Dakota family values. I have never testified before a committee or a legislator or anything of that sort, but this bill has, excuse me, has prompted me to come speak to you. This bill interferes with the parent-child-doctor relationship. My middle child identifies as non-binary, which some explain that this means they feel neither male nor female. This falls under the transgender umbrella. This journey for our family has not been easy. We have struggled with it, come to terms with it, and seen countless doctors. You need to realize that this is truly a life and death situation we're talking about here. The vast majority of transgender youth struggle with anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. This is what my family dealt with. These people are uncomfortable in the bodies that they were born in and will take drastic actions when it seems like that's their only option. All medical procedures and prescriptions should be between the parent, child, and doctor, not dictated by legislation. It is important to note these medical decisions are not made on a whim. To be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, it takes months and many, many doctor's appointments and many, many different doctors and to make that decision on how to handle the issue with the child. If you support this bill, you are telling me that you know what's best for my child. And frankly, you do not. I am the one that knows my child. I am the one that cares for them, and most importantly, I am the one who loves them and wants what's best for them. This is not a legislative decision. It is a decision for families and doctors qualified to make those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quincy Park?
Yep.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. As you know, my name is Quincy Park, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm here today to speak out against Bill 1057. I am 17 years old, a junior in high school, and have lived in Sioux Falls, South Dakota since the day I was born. I identify as non-binary, which means I am neither male nor female. I am transgender. In reading about this bill, my first reaction was disbelief. I couldn't believe that the medication it took months for me to get access to might not be available to my younger friends and every other kid like me. Once I realized that, yes, this was a real bill trying to pass, I felt attacked. Not only was this bill attacking me, my friends, my family, my doctors, and my community, it was accusing us of a problem that does not exist. I read that one of the sponsors of this bill said in a media interview that, quote, "We can try to prevent harm to those who may later regret it by hitting the pause button before someone pushes a child into a mistake that cannot be corrected tomorrow," end quote. Let me be clear. As someone who researched my own treatment options and someone who this bill would directly affect, what you're doing is not preventing harm. You're actively denying medical treatment to children who have such strong feelings of disconnect from their bodies that over half of them are or have been suicidal at some point in their lives. You do not seem to understand that the hormone blockers that you are trying to ban are the very pause button you are looking for, allowing the family more time to think before puberty can make irreversible changes. Not every trans kid will choose the same medical treatment. The same treatment may not even be recommended for every kid. But kids like me deserve the opportunity to consult with our doctors, our parents, and our physicians to make the decisions that are right for us. When I was younger, on days when it felt like I was drowning in my dysphoria, when all hope seemed lost, the promise of transitioning was so close. Just one more month, just one more appointment, just one more doctor. Every step of the way, I knew one thing. I know who I am. I don't need you to understand, but I need you to believe me when I say, I am Quincy Park. Thank you. Please vote no on Bill 1057.
Thank you. Susan Williams. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Susan Williams, and I'm a mom of 2 from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I'm here today to ask you to vote no on HB 1057. I grew up in the Midwest and moved to Sioux Falls about 28 years ago to go to the University of Sioux Falls, and since then have worked in children's ministries and sales. We have 2 kids. My son is 13, my daughter is 10. My son is a transgender boy. When he was 9 years old and in 3rd grade, my son was riddled with depression and anxiety, which is not normal for a 9-year-old kid. One day he came home from school and burst into tears. I can't do this anymore. I cannot be a girl anymore. That's the first time that he released the inner anguish and trauma. Something's not right here. We needed to work this out. So we made a plan. We went to counseling for a year. A year later, when Wright was 10 years old, he wrote an 8-page single-spaced letter to us saying that he is not a girl, he's not our daughter, he's our son. He said that he'd pray every night that God would change him into a boy, but God never answered his prayers. And he wanted us to try to find someone like him in the world. He had no idea that there were other people out there just like him. That was March of 2017. Since then, our son has blossomed and thrived. With the love and support of our family, he has been able to explore his passions and live life as a normal kid. But bills like HB 1057 threaten his ability to do so. Though I will not discuss my child's medical needs publicly, what I will say is that no decision is made lightly or on a whim. Caring for our child is the #1 priority for my husband and I, and it is our role as parents to make appropriate decisions. When politicians try to intervene in the sacred relationship between parents and children, harm is inevitable. Since 2017, I've gotten to know many parents and kids across South Dakota who are in the same situation as my family. I can tell you that they are terrified by this bill. They're scared because of the harm that this bill will do their families and because of the message that this bill sends to transgender kids and their families. Our children deserve better. They deserve to be loved and cared for and accepted, not treated as though there is something wrong with them or that they are a problem to be solved by politicians simply because of who they are. I know from personal experience that denying best practice medical care and support to transgender youth can be life-threatening. It has been shown to contribute to depression, social isolation, self-hatred, risks of self-harm, and suicidal behavior. Please vote no on this bill for families like mine and for kids like my son who deserve every chance to thrive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have time for one more if there's someone else that would like to speak.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Roger Tellinghuse, and I'm a practicing attorney in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I'm here today on behalf of the Human Rights Campaign. Human Rights Campaign is America's largest civil rights organization working to achieve lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer equality. HRC knows the critical role that compassionate, culturally competent care has in the life of transgender youth who simply seek to live as their authentic lives. Transgender kids deserve to be able to live their lives in a safe environment, to be able to be supported by the people who love them, and to get the health care that they need. Laws like HB1057 serve only to stigmatize transgender people, and that's why we oppose this piece of legislation before you today. It's important to emphasize that there are accepted professional standards of care, we've heard those today, relating to transgender youth, and that the prohibitions of this bill would prevent responsible, well-trained doctors from providing the care that these children need. These standards allow for a youth to delay puberty until the youth is old enough to make their own individualized decisions about what is right for their body, and to do so in consultation with their parents and their medical team. In contrast, HB 1057 inappropriately inserts itself into the doctor-patient relationship and prevents responsible medical care providers from being able to do their jobs, and it goes on to impose a criminal penalty for doing so. This legislation can cause major harm to transgender children and runs contrary to the prevailing recommendations of every major medical association. It's also a violation of the guarantee that every person should have the equal protection of our laws. There is no problem to be solved, and this bill is contrary to the professional consensus over best practices. I've been practicing for 42 years, and as a lot of you know, I had the privilege of serving as this state's Attorney General at one time. I've had also the opportunity to appear personally in front of the United States Supreme Court on 2 prior occasions. I know this particular issue has not yet been decided by the highest court in our land. It will, but I implore you not to make South Dakota the test case. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will close opponent testimony and open it up for rebuttal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the committee has certainly heard a lot in 40 minutes. We've had experts from each side. We've had child psychiatrists from each side give testimony. One saying vote no, and the other saying vote yes. We've had attorneys from both sides. One say vote no, the other say vote yes. And we've heard from parents and young people from both sides. We've heard how there's been injury and great harm. And then we've heard also the opposition say passing this bill will be great harm. So I don't need to recap too much more to you than to say to you that in my opinion, this is our role as government to interject when there is great harm. And every story, everything that I've read, every transgender person and detransgender person that I've spoken to has told me, I wish I would have had somebody say no. I wish somebody would have been the adult in the room. That's why I'm bringing this bill. Yes, this is an issue in South Dakota. Well, I don't have the magazine, but the detransgender people, the detransition people, transgender people have provided us all publications of problems that are going on here in the state. What I consider problems, children that should have had a pause, and not a chemical pause, but just, come on, can you wait until you're 16? Just wait. That's all we're asking for, is waiting till you're 16. We're not asking to wait till you're 30. We're asking to wait. Think about what you knew when you were that age. And think about what your children knew when they were that age. Think about the hormones running through their bodies. You know, I saw the data, or the statement, the claim that Mr. Krogman made, that 52% are less likely to commit suicide, and I tried to find that. And I wish somebody would provide a study on that, because to my knowledge, that was just an online poll that their site is using. That's all the reference I could find, just an online poll. So obviously that's unscientific. It has no validity. Put out the study and show us all. The chamber has issued their opinion. I spoke 3 or 4 weeks ago with Mr. Owen. He said, we're going to stay neutral in this. And then he laughed, but he said, but you know, of course, the chamber has no morals. That was his words to me, and I would swear to that under oath. I guess, you know, the bottom line for you is to decide what is more important. Is the issue of protecting our children more important? I think our people are still online. If you have questions for them, they're the experts. I'm the one carrying the bill. So I will stand by for your questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I will open it up to committee questions. Anyone have any questions? President Hanson.
Is there a way that I can speak?
No. No, we've closed testimony. We've opened it up to questions.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Dr. Laidlaw. If you can hear me, I hope you can hear me.
I'm here.
Thank you, Dr. Laidlaw, for your testimony earlier. We heard a little bit about this so-called standard of care that's been put out there by I believe it was the Endocrine Society. Can you talk a little bit about that? And can you also talk about, within that conversation, whether the use of these puberty blockers to block early puberty is the same thing as using these puberty blockers for blocking what would otherwise be a normal puberty?
Right, thank you, yeah. The idea that this is standard of care is false. And I'll tell you, you can look at those 2017 Endocrine Society, and they published what's called clinical guidelines. You can go to page 3895, and right at the bottom in the disclaimer it says, they do not establish a standard of care. This is not a standard of care. Also, you can look at the clinical guidelines for evidence quality grading. They're all for adolescents rated as low, very low, or no evidence at all. This is not the worldwide standard of care. This is not true at all. It never has been, and it's not safe for kids. As far as what the pediatric endocrinologist was saying earlier about precocious puberty, yes, Lupron's used for precocious puberty, because it's an abnormal condition. They start at age 4, and then you stop the medication at, say, age 11, and allow puberty to proceed. This is totally different than the non-FDA approved use to stop normal puberty. There you're blocking a developmental process and losing time in developing bone and developing brain, dealing with your peers and your parents to reach important milestones. So this is completely different and non-FDA approved.
Any further questions? President Peterson?
I've got a few. I don't know if I should just ask a good representative, Deutsch, or if I can go down the line on a few of these. Pretty simple question.
Yeah, just
If Miss Wright, is Miss Wright on the phone or on the Skype?
Hey, yes I am.
Are you from South Dakota?
No sir, I am from a small town in Rome, Georgia.
Thank you. Is Miss Meagher on the line?
Yes I am.
Are you from South Dakota?
Oh, wait a minute. Well, I'm not here on my own behalf. I'm here on behalf of the Kelsey Coalition, and we receive these letters and cries for help from parents all over, including South Dakota.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your work.
Yeah.
Where is home for you?
I live in Washington State, but as I say, I'm not here on my own behalf.
Thank you. Dr. Laidlaw? No.
Yes.
Where's home for you?
Rockland, California.
Thank you. Miss Chart? Is she still on? Maybe not. Representative Dino, yeah, I mean, we can do this with you too. Miss Representative, do you know where, or is Miss Chart from South Dakota?
Sure, I can answer your questions in one answer.
Fine.
So, all of my witnesses would.
I typed in a few ideas.
They are all from out of state, with the exception of the physician in the room and myself. I'm from Watertown.
No, I got it. Thank you. Well, I appreciate your response there.
any further questions?
Mr. Chair.
President Diedrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would have one for the sponsor of the bill, just for the cumulative answer, and if you want to go to the individuals. Of the testimony, proponent testimony this morning, and the procedures they discussed, were any of those procedures conducted in South Dakota? Any of those surgeries performed in South Dakota?
I'm aware of procedures that have been performed in South Dakota.
Were any of the proponents that today, were they conducted in South Dakota? Any of that testimony?
Just the two of us in the room. I'm not sure. What else you're asking? Maybe.
I'm asking, do South Dakota physicians perform irreversible gender changed surgery in South Dakota today? And is there evidence of that? That's what I'm asking.
Okay, thank you. What I know is that there are 4 physicians, 2 at Sanford, Planned Parenthood, and 1 at Rapid City Regional, that advertises for performing cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and mastectomies. To my knowledge, there's no one in South Dakota that does what the transgender people call the bottom surgeries, hysterectomies, that type of work.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Chair, I do have some further questions I need to.
Okay.
Maybe for the purpose of amendment.
Okay.
I do have a question, not for the proponents, but for the opponents. Is that in order at this point?
Yes, it is.
This is related, I guess this is really the same question for Dr. Naval or Dr. Michelle. So I thank you. And I just have the same question of you. Are you aware of any irreversible surgeries occurring in the state of South Dakota?
I don't have any patient of my own transgender patients because we have a center for transgender. But I cannot answer that question. I don't know.
Prior to coming, I discussed with our pediatric surgeons at Stanford Health, and I said, are you aware of any surgeons in the state that perform these permanent surgeries on minors? And the answer was no.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
So in the physician-patient relationship and in the care of minors, is it just broadly, not just in this area, but just broadly, what is the protocol or the standard procedures for conducting treatment and or surgeries on minors and stuff? Who can consent to that? Who is required to consent to that?
Usually the parents. Usually the parents.
And the exception being emergency
Yep. In case of emergencies, then there's no.
Would a transgender type procedure, treatment, or surgery be considered an emergency?
It is not an emergency. No.
So in any case, no matter for any treatment or any surgery, parents have to consent.
They have to consent. To any treatment we do, transgender or non-transgender, we go through the parents before we prescribe any medication.
Thank you.
Any further questions? President Gosh.
For this gentleman, I'm sorry,
It's okay.
terrible with names, I apologize for that. You testified before that the puberty blockers are not, they do not stint growth, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, Mr. Chair, but you did testify that it blocks the GnRH.
Oh, it does not. It's a GnRH agonist, so it works like GnRH. And then what it does, when you give GnRH with these continuous dose, it stops the two other hormones that are FSH and LH from being secreted, and that's how puberty is caused.
Apologize, I think I am getting dumber by the minute. Could you break that down for us in terms of what does that mean?
Can I give you an example? That will be
Mr. Chair, that's okay.
Okay. So let's say I have a 5-year-old girl coming to me with breast buds, and you don't expect a 5-year-old girl to have breast buds and start to grow faster. So when I meet with the family, I discuss with them that this is early or precocious puberty. And over 90% of girls who go to precocious puberty, we do not find a reason. So that means their body just decided to go to puberty, which there's no medical term other than central precocious puberty, just happened. In these situations, I think we all agree that we do not want a 5-year-old girl to go to puberty and have her period when she's 6, right? So and the other thing, when this girl is exposed to tons of estrogen, she grows really fast while she's being exposed to estrogen, so much she matures her bones really quickly, so she stops growing when she's 8 or 9. So she loses all these years till she's 16 or 17 of growth. So what do we do? So we stop puberty, okay? When we stop puberty, every other hormone other than the puberty hormones are being secreted normally, and then the girl will continue to grow without the effect of the estrogen accelerating her bone maturity and what we call bone age. When we stop puberty, when the girl is ready, 10 to 12 years of age, sometimes younger if the family and the kid feel that they're ready for puberty, and the predicted final height is within accepted limit, we stop the puberty blocking hormone, which is the GnRH agonist, and then we let puberty go, and then the girl starts back puberty, matures her bone normally, and then she stops growing like any other kid.
So, thank you very much. That was very, very good. All these big words. I tried reading GnRH and I just gave up after luteinizing hormone. I don't know. So again, thank you for that. So I'm gonna try to simplify this and break it down just a little bit more. I bring my daughter in. She's you've dictated that she is going through puberty early, and we want to block that. A, why would I want to block that? And B, what are the risks of me not doing that and just allowing nature to take course?
So what we do, we see the kids, we do the medical workup, and then we do also, if we find that it's a central puberty, which is the most common cause for central puberty, we do a brain MRI to make sure there's nothing in the brain causing it. And as I said, over 90% of the time we don't find the reason. Now, when I talk to a parent, there are 3 reasons to consider stopping puberty, and then if we decide these are acceptable to the parents, and we say, you know what, they can choose not to. These reasons are: 1, a 5-year-old who's growing really fast and is going to stop growing when she's 8, most likely she's going to be much, much shorter than every other kid her age. So she will be the shortest kid in class when she's 7, but way that the shortest one in the class when she's 14, if we don't stop puberty. Second is the social aspect of it. When you walk and you're 5-year-old, your brain acts like a 5-year-old, but you look like an 8-year-old because you have breasts, and you're growing like an 8 or 9-year-old. So you look like a 9-year-old. So the expectation from the society is different when they see you. So we don't know if the kid will handle that, and that's where the parents come in, and they know the maturity of their child. The third reason is, will this girl be able to handle having a period every month when she's 7 years old, or sometimes younger than that? And that's another third reason to stop it sometimes, because a 7-year-old, most 7-year-olds, I'm assuming, they have a hard time handling the puberty part or the bleeding part. So in this situation, we go over these. After the extensive work that was done before, we sit for over an hour with this discussion, and we say these are what are the risks. And the family, many families say, you know what, let's think about it and call you back, or we'll come back and talk to you again. And then they leave. They either call me, and we have another 30 to 60 minutes maybe on the phone discussing these, and then we decide if that's the right thing to do for the child or not. Most of the time, if a 5-year-old comes to me. On the other hand, if I have a 7-year-old, some of them say, you know what, it's okay, she can handle it, and we wait.
Yes, President Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly for that. This is the situation you're describing. Without treatment, do these conditions, in your experience, stall on their own without intervention?
It can go slow, but so there's 2 types of preterm puberty. There's a, no, I'm going technical, I'm sorry. So there's like a progressive or slowly progressive. So if I have a 6-year-old who's been having pubic hair, for example, since she was 4, and she's still not had anything else, and she's 6, and then we check her growth chart and she's growing just fine, her bones are not maturing too fast. In this situation, we don't want to go the same discussion, but saying, you know what, your child is not growing too fast. Your child doesn't seem like they're going to have a period within the next year or 2. Most likely, we're not going to need to do treatment. Let's discuss the options, and then we go through it.
Any further questions? Mr. McClary.
For Quincy Parks, please. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Oh, wrong person, sorry.
You're the same age as my grandchildren. And I want to know from you, how is life in school? Are you bullied, or are you accepted in general in school? Thank you.
Well, this is going to be a long discussion. Well, going all the way back to grade school, I didn't have a lot of friends. I had friends, but I was like a little kid. So my friends were not particularly best friends or anything like that. I always felt a little bit different, but it was never something that held me back as a child. It was just something like, I'm different, so what? I'm a kid, I don't care. And then through 5th grade and the beginning of middle school, it started to progress with puberty. I started to feel, it's a very hard feeling to describe. It's almost as if you are growing into a shoe that doesn't fit anymore. There's just something wrong and something uncomfortable with it. But at the time, I couldn't put a name to it. I didn't know what this feeling was. So again, I just ignored it. And then towards the end of middle school and until about sophomore year of high school, these feelings of dysphoria got very, very bad, to the point of anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts inducing. I went to a mental health facility for a while that put me on prescriptions to control my anxiety and depression. And I was more in control of my emotions, and I would say at this point, most people would have considered me very mature for my age. But I began to realize that these feelings I was having, I was not alone in them. I came out to my very supportive parents. I talked with other kids like me, and for once in my life was finally feeling happy with myself and like I had finally found something that fit. It finally all made sense, and then even though I was feeling like I could just grasp finally feeling normal, puberty kind of held me back, and these hormones were very restrictive and very difficult to deal with at times. And so we began seeing doctors and gender therapists, and after a very long period of time, I was put on puberty blockers, which I'm still on, and it has helped tremendously. I have gained so much more confidence, the confidence to come up here and talk about this. I have gained sureness of myself, and I finally feel comfortable in my own body. I finally feel like myself. I feel like Quincy Park, which was the ending to my speech. I finally feel like I know who I am, and I finally understand it, and all these little pieces that I've seen all my life, all these puzzle pieces finally fit together. And it has helped me tremendously. And this bill that would deny this feeling of understanding to other kids at a point in my, that are probably at a point in my life factoring end of middle school up until like halfway through high school, people who are at that point, if they don't have that hope of just one more month, one more year, I can do this, I can make it through this until then. If they don't have that kind of hope, I don't know how I would have done it, and I can see where other people are coming from in those feelings.
Thank you.
Any further questions? President Smith.
Sure. Question for the prime sponsor. Thank you. Mr. Chair. Thank you. So I found out Florida also introduced this legislation the day after we dropped it here in South Dakota. Did they copy your bill?
So give or take 10 or 12 states will be introducing this bill. The answer is yes.
Is follow
every legislature crafts their own, but to some extent, yes.
So is this bill, so you just answered this bill as part of a national movement?
No, I'd say it's part of a homegrown state movement. I pretty much developed it with LRC, and I took bits and pieces from other places, and the word got out through legislative communities and organizations that we all belong to. And other legislators out of the blue just called me up and said, will you send me a copy of your bill? So that's the reality of how this thing is going all over the state and all over the country.
Then I have one more question.
Okay.
Argus Leader reported that you said that you're the only adult in the room. Is it possible that other adults have honest and reasonable disagreements with you, and we could still vote against this bill and be adults?
First of all, I didn't say that. I said we need to be adults, and secondly, I'm sure you're an adult. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Any further questions? President Dietrich.
I do for the sponsors, as long as you're up there, and it's a friendly question. I'm just asking, I see that the AMA is looking at policies and possibly model procedures or model legislation addressing, as they call it, conversion therapy, or conversion therapy basically, and procedures, that the AMA is looking at that as a medical body. And I'm just wondering if you've seen anything like that that's part of what you took into consideration for your bill, and I anticipate they would be have a lot
Can
of
you define conversion therapy for me?
No, the AMA didn't define it in this report on their most recent interim meeting. It's talking about new policies, and the AMA's House of Delegates is a policymaking body at the American Medicine Center, and it says that they will develop model state legislation and advocate for federal legislation related to reparative or conversion therapy. So I don't know if that's surgical procedures or therapy, but it's an area of expertise or resource, and I was just curious because we have different opinions on the insurance of some of the therapies.
What I am aware of is that there's only a handful of South Dakota physicians that belong to the AMA. Now, there's a big group in the room, maybe they can give you a number on it, but I think it's, I don't know, less than 30%, 40%, there's not a lot in South Dakota. But unless you can, define what that term is, I just don't really know how to comment, to be honest.
Yeah, I received it from a constituent who supports your bill, and I assume that it would be something maybe that you had considered helping in your cause.
I can tell you that probably 50 different physicians, medical doctors, went into crafting this bill. Attorneys, moms and dads of children that have been hurt by these procedures contributed to the input of the bill. Lots and lots of people. It started out as a 15-page bill, and now is a page and a half. It's very narrowly defined, and it does not at all deal with precocious puberty. It specifically defines puberty as normal puberty. That's the only type of puberty this bill will affect, FYI.
Thank you. I really wasn't looking for another closing statement on your part, but
I was here to give it to you. An extra bonus.
Yeah, for you. Thank you. I do have, Mr. Chairman, I do have one question for the opponents. A request, if they have more specific information on the economic impact or the, we've heard the state what impact businesses coming to South Dakota, things like that. I haven't really seen, I know there's probably some printed information on that. Maybe it's in your handout, but if there was any elaboration you wanted to, I think that would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, David Owen, South Dakota Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I've done a lot of idiotic things in my life. Walking to this table at your request is one of them. The most specific economic consequences I can give you were a number of years ago when House Bill 1008 was there and regulated use of bathrooms, and then we heard specifically from several associations, and most importantly, the folks that deal with tournaments. And the NCAA had some very specific guidelines. Now, I understand that when 105 legislators, NCAA doesn't mean a whole lot, but it does to Sioux Falls and other communities that host those tournaments, and they were making it fairly clear that states that had draconian discrimination statutes would not be a place that they would put those tournaments. We have used the North Carolina experience. The counter argument, and they estimated their first year losses at 100 million plus. The counter to that is they've got a $100 billion economy, so what? But when you're in that industry, $100 million is significant. And I can tell you, and again, this is guilty of the vagaries that plague this discussion. I have heard from economic developers that phones ring. I have heard from our financial institutions, manufacturers that are national and international, cautions and concerns, and the lecture always comes, to me at least, it says, we are an inclusive employer. We don't want you, in South Dakota Chamber, endorsing these kinds of bills because we need the workforce and we're inclusive in that. That's as close as I can get to
President Haugaard, just to follow up from Mr. Owen. Mr. Owen, we hear a lot of anecdotal information. Did you ever bother to check on North Carolina to find out what their revenues did?
Mr. Chairman, Speaker, no.
Well, I can tell you that they went up by $500 million from before the legislation and all the way through today. So the anecdotal information doesn't seem to be consistent. Would you agree? If that's what's reflected in the revenues?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I can't agree because I don't know which revenues you're talking about.
I'm talking about their sales tax revenues reflecting in their budgets.
Chairman, Mr. Speaker, sales taxes are derived even in the tourism industry from many factors. So unless I could see that, that doesn't mean that they weren't missing $100 million from canceled tournaments and gained that from local tax rates.
And there's no distinction from the previous years to current years as far as their growth and their revenues is what I'm simply saying. So I'm suggesting it might be wise if you actually check the revenue.
Thank you.
President Goodwin had a question.
Yeah, a question for the ACLU lobbyist. I didn't catch your name, I apologize. I think Candy, is that correct? I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name.
Yes, my name's Candy Brings Plenty.
Can you say the last name again?
Brings Plenty. My full name before colonization was Brings Plenty Horses to its tribe.
I probably wouldn't remember that either, would I? You mentioned transgender youth. Does the ACLU or your organization that you represent have a number of children, the youth that this bill would affect? Is there a number out there in South Dakota?
Right now we have a coalition of 33 organizations across South Dakota who are part of our LGBTQ and Two-Spirit coalition. And we have utilized our coalition to reach out to those community members. And right now I don't have an exact number, but I do have the list in front of me of those coalitions, if you would like to hear that.
So is it like 500 or like 50?
I can speak personally on behalf of, I reside on the Pine Ridge Reservation. My child is non-binary and gender fluid, who also identifies as a demi-boy, which is terminology that is a part of our Ally Academy that the ACLU can offer training to each of the committee members and the legislators. And in her school alone, there's over 17 students who identify, and that's just one of the tribal reservation schools out of the 3 on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And there's 9 tribes and all the districts across South Dakota. So I'm pretty sure there's more than 500.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, we're running up against the clock here, but I have checked with the Senate. They do have meetings, but we still have some more time. So I'll entertain 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll go into committee discussion. President Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the prime sponsor. We had it's been a little while now, but we had a bit of a discussion earlier about blocking early onset puberty. And I just want to be clear, does this bill apply in those situations?
Mr. Sponsor.
I know what you mean.
All right. Thank you for the question. So to be clear, this bill does not apply to those early pathologic conditions known as precocious puberty. That means early. The pediatric endocrinologist was speaking about the use of Lupron or other puberty blockers for those children. And in that situation, it's been researched. It's FDA approved. But for normal puberty, children older, it has never been researched. It has never been approved by the FDA. It is completely experimental. So the answer is it has not been researched.
President Peterson.
One more for the prime sponsor. Representative, you've been working on this a long time, right? And you put a lot of effort and energy into this. My question is, the day before your committee hearing, you offered to us, 3 different major amendments. Why?
Oh, good question. Thank you. Do you want to start? You want to go each amendment one by one?
Sure. We didn't really. We talked about them a little bit, but just
sure.
That'd be great.
Sure. We dropped the penalty from a felony to a misdemeanor based upon input from many of you that the bill would still do its intended consequences to protect children, whether it's 10 years in jail versus a year in jail. So the belief was that the hospital systems and those providers would opt not to perform these procedures simply with a misdemeanor, and that we didn't have to go to the felony. So that was input from my colleagues since session started, just a week ago. I can't recall which. It was just suggested to me that maybe it was Representative Diedrich who suggested to me that we omit non-licensed practitioners from the bill. I thought it was a good idea, and it could have been another. It was one of the legislators who suggested that to me. Great idea, I thought. Yes, it's right and just to do so. And then I thought that lowering the age from under 18 to under 16 would allow us to simply focus on the most vulnerable of children. It was a philosophical decision that I had to make. Given that this is the first time we've had this discussion in South Dakota, and given that a dozen other states are going to have the same discussion, I thought it was a good move.
I think we're going to have to close questions, unless you've got a follow-up, President Peterson. Okay. With that, I will close questions, public testimony, and open it up for committee discussion. We can have a motion.
I move to pass in 1057 as amended.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Now we'll have discussion. President Hoggarden.
Thank you. I think we're looking at three things here. We're looking at science and belief systems and money. When I heard Ms. Clark testify, I agree with what she said as far as this being a life and death issue. I really agree with that. And I also see the wisdom in the testimony from the therapist who talked about the fact that in this kind of situation, minors really cannot give informed consent because the information isn't out there adequately to do that. And as he also testified, gender is really a psychosocially, or gender description is really a psychosocial constructed viewpoint. When you look at the medical side of it, the science side of it, a lot of the research is based on the WPATH, which is the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And they have a standard of care that you can take a look at. It's over 100 pages and it's documented as far as their peer review. And that's a standard of care I read some years ago and reviewed today as well. That standard of care is based on research that's really circular. The supporting studies are from people that are in association with that organization and support the general construct of it. So it's to say it's peer reviewed and that it's reliable is a false belief. It's simply, as I said, a circular logical process. There's an implication along the way that somehow this might be a solution looking for a problem, but I think we know that that's not true. There's certainly people here who live in South Dakota and indicated that their lives have been affected by this situation. If we're looking at best practices in medicine, I think we've got to look at what your research tells. And what we find in the research that seems to be supported even in ongoing litigation is that the inappropriate use of Lupron has led to multi-billion-dollar litigation, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And the results are that the inappropriate use of Lupron is resulting in fines against the company that produced it, in part because of the health effects, and in part because of the illegal price inflation. So there's a dollar and cents factor here as well. And I'd also just point out that this Lupron is medically damaging. It's in large measure based on social and cultural views that are not well supported by science. So when I look at this and I look at science, I think the science is far more confirming that this needs a lot more research, and there isn't any solid biological study that suggests that the idea of gender reassignment makes medical sense or scientific sense. And you look at the money component, and we always hear, what if we're going to be sued, or what if it affects our economic climate? And then we don't look at the facts. And the facts just simply indicate that people want to be involved in factual decisions in their life. They want to have good science to support the medicines they use, and I think that it's incumbent upon us to listen to those that have actually applied the scientific research and understand the implications of using these drugs or engaging in these procedures. And I think we do need to protect the most vulnerable in our society.
Representative Dietrich.
I have a substitute motion. I move 1057G as a substitute motion.
1057G.
Yes.
So where is that?
It's posted. It's on there.
I'm computer illiterate.
Oh, well, it's on my LRC under, and it should be visible to the entire public. The motion amends the bill by deleting the sections on page 1, line 22, 23, 24, page 2, line 1, 2, 3, and renumbering on 3. So what that does is it takes out the prohibition on the puberty blocking medications and testosterone and estrogen provisions in there. And that's, the motion is based on the testimony of a South Dakota physician related to the efficacy of those treatments. And the purpose of the bill is to prevent irreversible surgery on minors or less than minors. And though we've heard testimony that those therapies are useful in many different ways, both physically and psychologically and emotionally, and there's a difference in opinion as to the intensity of those. And so I believe that there's sufficient testimony that says that those things are needed. I believe it can fall out of the bill because the real intent of the bill is to prevent parents from consenting to an irreversible surgery changing the sex of a minor. So I think this amendment is intended to allow those therapies to deal with the other issues that are related to it without taking them into step. And so
Okay, just for clarification, I think it's H, not G.
It's an H. I'm sorry.
I think so. That's what we have pulled up here, and it says H.
Is it?
Just want clarification on that.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. My own handwriting on my note is. I'm like Representative Goss sometimes with keeping track.
Is there a second? Second by Dennert. Any further discussion? President Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would urge that the committee defeat this motion. We did hear from a number of doctors that these drugs can have long-term consequences when prescribed to children. I believe we heard that from Dr. Ritter, and I believe we heard that from Dr. Laidlaw. And furthermore, we've heard numerous people testify that these drugs have not been FDA approved for use in kids in these situations, that the long-term effects of these drugs on kids are unknown. And so this bill is about protecting kids from these drugs being prescribed to these young children in South Dakota in an experimental fashion. We don't know the long-term effect. And so I would urge this committee to go ahead and defeat this motion. Thank you.
Any further comments? President Gosh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to reiterate also to defeat this motion. We've essentially just taken a shotgun to a bucket and told somebody to go water a horse with it. That's just not going to work. I mean, that guts this entire bill. You might as well just vote no on the bill.
Any further comments?
Mr. Chairman.
President Dietrich.
I have to disagree respectfully with Representative Gosh. It does not gut the bill. The intended purpose, as stated by the proponent and the prime sponsor, is to prevent irreversible sex change, gender change surgery for minors. Now that's already been dropped down to 16, so it doesn't include all minors. But the intent of the bill is to prevent irreversible gender young folks that are dealing with those kinds of issues and challenges. It doesn't take them to that line where it's an irreversible surgical procedure. So I don't believe that that's the bill. I think it maintains the intent, yet it provides resources for taking care of the kids who are facing those challenges and the families. So I would urge you to do it.
Okay, with that, it will be a voice vote unless the chair is in doubt, and then we will have a roll call. So all in favor of HB 1057H, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Nay! Motion fails. We are back to the original bill, 1057. You pass motion on that.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I do appreciate what has been a relatively civil discourse that's been had in committee today. But I also think about a lot of the correspondence that has been received via email or phone call. And I do want to note that as I look at the people on this committee, I know them all personally. None of them are filled with hatred or malice. None of them are mean-spirited or bigoted. The same can be said for the entire South Dakota legislature. And for the overwhelming majority of the people of the state of South Dakota. We respect the dignity of all human persons. This isn't about hate. This is about protecting really young children from making life-altering decisions before they have the reasoning capacity to fully know the long-term consequences of those decisions. We're talking about injecting our little 12-year-old South Dakota daughters with testosterone in a fashion that is not FDA approved. We're talking about blocking their puberty in a way that is not FDA approved. We're talking about cutting off little girls' breasts. And now there's been some question as to whether those mastectomies are actually taking place in South Dakota, but the reality is that the so-called standards of care that these doctors say that they follow, mastectomies are part of that so-called standard of care. These kids cannot possibly know the long-term consequences of these actions. How can they know when we don't know the long-term effects? There's no FDA approval. There's not been long-term studies about kids taking these kinds of drugs. Even the South Dakota Medical Association today testified that it's the parent that is complicit. It's the parent that gives the consent. The South Dakota Medical Association testified today that the kid can't give consent. Their lobbyists testified that it's the parent, not the kid. We treat kids differently under the law. Under 18 years of age, unless it's a very extreme circumstance, you're not going to get convicted of a felony. You're going to be charged as a juvenile delinquent. You can't vote under 18. You can't drink under 21. You can't even smoke now under 21. You can't gamble. You can't drive. Kids under the age of 16 can't consent to sexual activity. Why? Because minors need our protection. They're prone to irrational decisions. We've all been there. And they don't have the reasoning capacity to know what's best for them, especially long term. I think about the kids in my own life. I think about my own children, my nieces and nephews, and sometimes kids will say, "How long is it going to be till we leave?" And you say, "It'll be an hour." And the kid says, "An hour? That's crazy. I can't believe it's going to take an hour." I mean, they have no concept of even short time frames. We're talking about life-altering decisions that they'll live with for the rest of their life. That's why we passed these protections. The bill's exactly right on the definition of sex, what sex is. The National Institute for Health defines sex as the biological differences between females and males, including chromosomes, sex organs, endogenous hormone profiles. The World Health Organization defines defines gender as those characteristics of women and men that are largely socially created, while sex encompasses those that are biologically determined. That's science. Sex doesn't change. Male and female have created them. That's truth. So we're talking about cosmetic measures that are done through some seriously strong and irrevocable procedures. And it's just not good medicine. Mr. Laidlaw testified to the irreversible effects of cross-sex hormone therapies and puberty blockers. And this is from a guy named Brian Anderson. It's talking about this, one of the most long-term studies of this in adults took place in Sweden. This says the most thorough follow-up of sex reassigned people extending over 30 years and conducted in Sweden, where the culture is strongly supportive of the transgender, documents their lifelong mental unrest. 10 to 15 years after surgical reassignment, the suicide rate of those who had undergone sex reassignment surgery rose to 20 times of their comparable peers. But natural puberty cures gender dysphoria in the majority of the cases. So we have some idea of the effect on adults, according to this large study. According to that study, it showed an increase in suicide rate. We have no clue the effect on children. And I fear that it doesn't also lead to increased suicide. A small number of Sioux Falls doctors, Dr. Mappetit and Planned Parenthood, are experimenting on little kids without knowing all the consequences. And that's wrong. I didn't hear, maybe I missed it. Did anybody point to a study on the long-term effects of testosterone in little girls? I didn't hear it. Did anybody hear that that was FDA approved? I didn't hear that. These puberty blockers, are they FDA approved for this situation? I didn't hear that either. No. And the NIH says that the long-term safety of testosterone as hormone replacement or therapy is not well established. So how can these little boys and girls consent to the long-term effects of these procedures when the doctors and the scientists don't even know? At least let these children become consenting adults so that they can participate in these activities knowingly and voluntarily and assume that risk on their own before we go experimenting on little kids. Even if you're unsure about the conflicting testimony, studies on one side or the other, why experiment on kids? Let consenting adults do that. I would ask for your favorable consideration of this bill. Thank you.
Any further comments, Mr. Chair? President Smith.
Couldn't disagree more with the good representative that just spoke before me. I was in the same room listening to the same testimony, and I was looking for a South Dakota problem. It wasn't brought to my attention. I've not been given any evidence that people are harming people in the state of South Dakota, that our physicians are harming people in the state of South Dakota. It goes against the Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm. So what we're assuming with this law is that our doctors are doing harm. We're assuming as a legislature that we know better, again, than medical providers. I, for one, do not believe that I know better. I'm a wrestling coach. All right? I trust experts. And here's the deal on that. We have experts on both sides. We rounded up a group from across the country to get our proponents. Our opponents are right here today. South Dakotans talking about what goes on here in the state of South Dakota. I do not want to be a court case at the federal level, a litmus test for our country. We don't need to fund the Supreme Court case, South Dakota. Trust our physicians. They have a board of ethics. And secondly, you heard from parents right in this room that have had to deal with some really tough stuff. And I know these folks, and they love their kids, and they're not trying to harm their kids. They're trying to do what's right for their child. It's not my place to step in. It's their job, along with their physician, to make these decisions. Vote no on this bill.
President McClary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll do a little shorter. To me, sitting here today as a legislator, I've seen an inspiration from the young adult who came and testified. That's what I'm looking at. Being on the hospital board, there's a couple of us here that have some health care under our belt. To me, it's an attack on the health care system, on the medical field, and on the family and the business. That's what I'm seeing. I want to thank all of you that did come, but I too will be voting no.
Any further comments? Okay. Representative Peterson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This has been a very important discussion, I think, and one that's wrapped with a lot of emotion at times. When I get into those discussions, I try to unwind the emotion and simply look at what are we doing here. And in the testimony today, I heard that the surgeries are not happening in South Dakota. And I don't know if the systems allow that. But what I've been thinking about a lot is, okay, if we pass this law and the governor signs this bill, is our work done? We can just say, does it go away? Is this problem or this issue, we don't have to worry about it anymore? I don't think so. I'm a dad. I've got a 7-year-old little boy and a 5-year-old little girl. And I can never even imagine to put myself in the position of a parent that has gone through this. But if I ever were to be in that situation with my wife, I try to think about, well, what would I do, right? Well, first I'd say a prayer to God for help, right? And then I would call my pediatrician of my children. In fact, I called her yesterday on my drive out because I trust her. I trust that she has the knowledge that I don't. I trust that she'll give me counsel and my wife counsel to help us make a decision if we were ever to be in that situation. We've trusted her with major decisions in our kids' lives their whole life. But if I were her and this bill passed, I would tell her not to answer the phone. And I would advise those systems to tell their doctors not to answer the phone as well. Because how are we going to enforce it? How are we going to decide where that line is and where it's crossed? I haven't heard anything about that today. And I don't know if that's a risk worth taking. I understand if this were just about the surgery, I'm okay. The other thing is, as I said earlier, if this would pass, are we going to say, okay, it's not going on in South Dakota, so are these folks going to go to Minnesota, North Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, Wyoming to seek care? Is that going to be against the law in South Dakota to do that? If they get a prescription from a doctor that's out of state and they come into South Dakota to fill that prescription, are they breaking the law? I don't know. So for those reasons today, I will be voting no on the DMAS motion.
Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll finish it up and then we'll take a vote. I want appreciate everybody, or I very much appreciate everybody that came here today. Very respectful on both sides, did a great job. I thank everybody for coming here. This is an extremely emotional issue. A lot of different, we heard both sides, great testimony on both sides. I have the utmost respect for each and every one of these men sitting up here that are going to be voting on this right now. Everybody up here will vote their heart, what they believe, the way they feel it should be handled. As we move forward with this, I don't believe there's any way this is okay for a minor, any way, shape, or form. Whether it's the puberty blockers, and I've heard, both sides, the jury's out on that. It should not be given unless for there's certain conditions where it's allowable, but just because you're mixed up, I was mixed up when I was 5 and 6 and 7 years old. You don't have the ability to make that decision. So I will be supporting this as we move along. So with that, I will have the secretary call the roll. All in favor say aye, opposed no.
Representative Anderson.
No.
Dennert.
Aye.
Dietrich.
No.
Goodwin.
Aye.
Gosh. Hanson. Hawkard. Jensen. McCleary.
No.
Peterson. Smith.
No.
Beal.
Aye.
Plum.
Aye.
7 votes.
House Bill 1057 passes 8 yes, 5 no. It will be sent to the floor. Okay, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.